I don't know what we're looking at. Okay. Wow, that was a really great intro. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jenny Noonan-Dye. I'm joined by my co-host, Brant Malone. Hello, Brant.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Jenny. This is not your normal setup, is it?
It is not. I'll get to that in just a second. I also want to acknowledge that I'm here with my illustrious husband,
Hello.
John Dye. We are here to discuss Come Follow Me. It's today's Sunday school lesson for Sunday, May 17th, in the year of our Lord, 2020. The title of the lesson this week is We Have Entered into a Covenant with Him. It covers Mosiah, the book of Mosiah, and the book of Mormon, chapters 18 through 24. Brant, like you recognized, John and I are not coming to you from our normal setting, and I want to get this out of the way. Apologies. I'm so sorry if our connection is spotty or less smooth than usual, I guess I would say. We are out of town. We had to travel. We are not vacationing during a pandemic, people. We've traveled to a family memorial. One of John's relatives passed away, and so we've driven to where people gathered yesterday for a very beautiful memorial in honor of his uncle who has passed away. So
did you get explicit?
That's what we're doing
from Governor Gary Herbert for this travel? Because I just want to make sure everything is kosher, Jenny.
Yeah. Let's go with yeah. That's yeah. And interestingly enough, and I'm sure we'll talk about this when we do our podcast this week, Brant, but Utah has moved, for the most part, from orange status to yellow status, except for some very specific areas, for instance, where I work. So we'll see what happens there.
The earth is healing, if you will.
I'm sorry?
The earth is healing or something like that.
Please bless. Please bless. So, as always, thank you all for joining us. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to know, good morning, Barbara. Hello. We'd love to know where you're watching from. We'd love to know what stood out to you about this week's lesson. As you studied Mosiah chapters 18 through 24, is there anything that that really kind of struck a chord with you? Maybe it was your first time reading and studying these chapters. Maybe it was your 100th time reading and studying these chapters. And, each time you can learn something new. Not only that, but you can apply new things to your life, I think, depending on your experience and your circumstance. And I think that's certainly the case with some chapters here that we will get into when it comes to making burdens light. So, I want to also say next week we will be here again at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, 12 noon Eastern, to discuss next week's lesson. They were called the People of God, which will cover Mosiah chapters 25 through 28. So I want to make sure everyone is aware of that and make sure you know that you're welcome to join us. You're invited. Hello to Amber in Mesa. Hello to Brenda. Hello to Bella. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. Again, what of this week's lesson stood out to you? Brant, do you have anything to say just off the top?
I do. I would say that out of all of the lessons that we've done, out of all of the sections of the Book of Mormon that we've discussed, this is probably one of my favorite ones, especially, and I think that we might spend a lot of time on Mosiah 18. There's a lot of talk on what the church, at least at that time, is and what baptism means. And not to steal any thunder or not to spoil some of what we're going to talk about, but I really think that if you boil down Mormonism to its essence, it really can be found in a few select chapters of the Book of Mormon. I mean, obviously, a lot of focus on Christ, so 3 Nephi 11 is going to be one, but this section right here on what it means to enter into Christ's church, what it means to become baptized, like this, to me, this is the really good stuff here.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And, there was an article that you shared with me from By Common Consent that talks about exactly that, about what it means to become a member of Christ's church. And that's and we'll get to that in a minute. But you know, baptism, typically in our church, children will get baptized at the age of 8, not as infants. 8 years old is and I know there have been exceptions, but minimum age of requirement for baptism. So what are the covenants we make at baptism? This is something that if we were teaching in a church class is something I would ask. I've asked it in young women. I've asked it in primary. I've asked it to adults. What are our baptismal covenants? Anyone? Anyone?
Well, I will spoil a little bit because we talked this morning. So the one that always stands out to me is mourning with those that mourn and comforting those that stand in need of comfort. Those are the two that really always have stood out to me. So we're going to promise God that we're going to do that. And then he's going to promise that he's going to do things like forgive our sins and give us the gift of the Holy Ghost and to have that in our lives. I mean, that's really, there's other things that we'll promise to do. We'll promise to, live the commandments and things like that. But I always thought it was interesting that the mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort are kind of two of the big things that are like right off the bat. Boom. This is a big part of what we're going to do.
I love that. And what's interesting to me is when I've been in other classes before, and this has come up, like, what are our baptismal covenants? It's something where sometimes it could be like, oh, I mean, I got baptized. I committed to being a member of Christ's church. What does that mean? And the first thing that I think of is what we hear in the sacrament prayers every week, right? That we, anyone sacrament prayers? Always remember him. That we keep his commandments, that we always remember him. That's what it means to be a member of his church. And but I like what you're saying, Brent, because that's absolutely true. I'd like to go to quickly Mosiah chapter 18, verses 17 through 31. And while anyone who's on is turning there, if you want to, I just want to say hello to a few more people who have joined. Kathleen from Rigby, Idaho, Annette from California, Julie from Phoenix. Hello, Bonnie. And okay, Barbara answered. She said, you got to go back to it. For a baptismal covenant, to be a covenant people or person. Yeah, there's something to that about being, and whether it's an individual or a group of people who have made covenants. Who have we made with whom have we made those covenants, and for what? Again, Mosiah chapter 18, verses 17 through 31. There are three things I want to address with these verses. All in all, it's the idea that God's people are united, or should be united. If we're not united, we should recognize and get back to that and do what we need to do to become united. The first thing I want to talk about is being united as members of Christ's church. And then the other two really quickly are, why do we need a church? And how can we help people who don't feel like they belong? Because there are many. How can we help them feel like they do belong? So again, Mosiah 18, chapter 18, verses 17 through 31. These are some of the commandments that Alma gave his people to help them become united as members of Christ's church. So starting in verse 17, and they were called the church of God, or the church of Christ, from that time forward. And it came to pass that whosoever was baptized by the power and authority of God was added to his church. And it came to pass that Alma, having authority from God, ordained priests, even one priest to every 50 of their number did he ordain to preach unto them and to teach them concerning the things pertaining to the kingdom of God. And he commanded them that they should teach nothing save it were the things which he had taught, which had been spoken by the mouth of the holy prophets. Yea, even he commanded them that they should preach nothing save it were repentance and faith on the Lord, who had redeemed his people. And so there we see, like you were talking about, Brant, the organization of a church. And this kind of goes into the next topic, but I want to kind of keep all, if we can hold all these three ideas again about being united, why we need a church, and how to help people feel that they belong. In verse 21, it says, and he commanded them that there should be no contention one with another, but that they should look forward with one eye, having one faith and one baptism, having their hearts knit together in unity and in love towards another. And I guess I would just ask, how would you feel about that? And this is rhetorical. You can answer if you'd like, but how do you feel about that as it applies to not just the general body of the church, but your local congregation, your ward, or your branch, or even your stake? How do you feel like there is no contention one with another? Do you have, do you look forward with one eye, having one faith? Are your hearts knit together in unity and love towards one another? I guess there are a lot of ways to evaluate that. And we have to be careful that when we're doing that, what we're not doing is evaluating other people, because I think that we then could have the tendency to criticize other people and maybe what they're not doing.
There's so much there, because you talk about the concept of unity. So what does unity mean? Because we sometimes come into some, I don't want to say issues, but some disagreements within the church about this concept of unity. Does that mean that we all think as one body, mind unit? Is there room for people to interpret things differently? We see this pop up sometimes with politics within the church. Not everybody is a conservative Republican. Not everyone's a liberal Democrat. There's a lot of different types of people there. And I don't think, I like that the church has been very explicit that they don't take a particular political position on things, because it leaves room for a lot of that. So the unity concept is interesting, because you could also look at it and say, well, so-and-so is raising their children different than me, and I don't agree with that. So are we at odds? So-and-so does things differently than I do. So that's one bucket. The other bucket that I think is interesting too is this idea of, and I've always loved referring to it, you brought up unity within our wards, branches, stakes, and I'll just use ward because that's where I live. I've always loved the idea of a ward family, and using that word family, because I'm not sure if it's this way with your family, Jenny. I know that you have a perfect family. But
it's true. It's true. Listen, it's seamless. It's very easy to explain. Our family is perfect. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Nailed it.
No, yeah. It's but the thing I love about the idea of calling it a family is, just because you're a family and just because you love each other doesn't mean that there's not going to be disagreements, doesn't mean that people aren't going to get on each other's nerves. But at the end of the day, it's all based on a foundation of love. Like we're a family, we're in this together, and we're going to like different things. We're going to sometimes believe different things, but at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And that's what I really like about referring to our wards, branches, stakes as a family, or a ward family, or a branch family, because I think that brings the context in there, and that reminds people we're all going to get on each other's nerves sometime. That's going to happen. It's inevitable. But let's not make that the entire focus of what we do, because that's what happens in families.
I love that. And actually this completely dovetails on a discussion that John and I had with some family members this week about different ways to operate within a group of people who have covenanted to worship the same way, the different ways to mourn, right? That, of course, and that's the thing. I mean, just like in a family, you can have two different people who do not agree on many things, but at the end of the day have covenanted to mourn with those who mourn, comfort those who stand in need of comfort. And so what does that mean between those people with those disagreements? You can have both at the same time. There have been some really great comments that I want to address here. Tyler Harper, says ward families are great, but they function like a regular family. We can still be dysfunctional.
Now Tyler, hold on. I mean, things in Canada might be a little bit different than they are here down in the States, but But I agree with you, Tyler. I mean, that's the other thing too, is sometimes there's dysfunction in families. And Jenny, I'm not sure if you've had this situation before, but I have been in wards with major dysfunction there, and it is brutal sometimes. And there's just a weight, and I'm not sure if you've ever felt that before.
It's tricky, and I'll be honest with you. It's I had an experience in a ward that I lived in before where I don't know how much contention there was or how much disagreement, but there were, I would say, certainly divisions, meaning, like this group of people stayed with this group of people and this group of people, and there was not a lot of intertwining. And then we had a situation where we lived close to a lake, and a supercell, basically like the base of a tornado, formed over the lake and came through our neighborhood. And it ripped siding off of houses. It knocked down power lines. It knocked out vinyl fence sections. And we were without power in the dead heat of summer for a long time. And I'll tell you what, everyone came out. And I mean, where I live, of course, most everyone in the neighborhood is part of that ward family. There are others who are not as well. So this may be something that was more of a neighborhood thing than a ward thing. But I think it's worth mentioning that what happened is you saw, what are they called? Generators come out. And, one generator could be hooked up to 2 homes for 4 hours, for your freezer or whatever, and then rotate to the next 2 homes. And we just kind of all pulled together to use the limited resources we had to make the best of the situation. We really, comforted those who needed comfort. And that happened to be each other in that really weird time. And I know that right now we're in a time where a lot of people are mourning, a lot of people are needing comfort. And even though it can't always be as in person and physically close as we'd want, there are ways to do that. And I know there have been a lot of wards who have done that, and beyond ward boundaries too. I want to go up a little bit to some other, as we're talking about baptismal covenants. Tyler says, we've worked on simplifying the gospel for my son who is on the autism spectrum. These covenants covenant to comfort others and mourn with others makes it something that he can understand. We emphasize it a lot because it is simple and can be applied to nearly every aspect of life. It helps to teach empathy as well. The simpler, the better in our house. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Tyler. Interestingly, the comment that came right after that is, I don't know if you guys got together, but Jared Davis says, I am high functioning autistic. And I can say that this really resonates with me as something that is important for many people like me. We can absolutely, when discussing the gospel, get caught up in the weeds and make it more complicated than it needs to be. And I think a lot of times it can be, but I think that when we're talking about the essence of the gospel, what it means to covenant to be a member of Christ's church, it really is as simple as what we covenant to do is be there for each other, to comfort those who stand in need of comfort, and to stand as a witness at all times too, which is another aspect of this.
Can I box just really quickly on that idea? Because I would say that I totally agree with Tyler and with Jared and some of the other comments we've gotten, Jenny, and you as well, on the idea of simplifying it down. I wonder sometimes, though, if that simplification also makes it difficult for people. So sometimes those within the needs, it's easier because you know exactly what you need to do or how you need to do it. Whereas this whole concept of mourning with those that mourn and comforting those that stand in need of comfort is hard because we don't exactly know what to do. We don't have prescribed to say, okay, you make them cookies, make them 12, make sure they're chocolate chips, you drop it off here. And then, no, it's a lot more involved with that. And so I think sometimes that might be part of one of the more difficult things about the baptismal covenant that we make, because some people can say, okay, follow the commandments. I know the commandments, check those off. I'm not trying to make light of it, but didn't kill anyone today. Didn't commit adultery today. I'm good. Awesome. did I comfort anyone that stood in need of comfort? Well, that's a lot more difficult. And so it's simple in the sense of, and like Jared and Tyler were saying, but also like we experienced with our kids today. My 6-year-old, my 4-year-old, and my 1-year-old was more interested in chewing on the crust of our sacrament bread. But like we talked about with our kids, that's something that they understand. When people are feeling sad, we should try and help them. And sometimes we just need to sit there and be sad with them. But as we've seen sometimes for adults like you and I and John, Jenny, that could be tough because it's like, I don't know what. Yeah, I know. That's the point. No one knows what to do, but we've got to do it.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a really pertinent point here, Brent, because the reason I mentioned simplifying it down, it's good to remember, get back to square one, the square one of loving each other, of supporting one another, of comforting one another, of doing as Christ would do. However, it isn't always prescriptive because people need different things at different times. And I like what you said about, what did you say to your daughter? Like to be sad with them?
Yeah. Sometimes we need to be sad with people who are sad.
Do you know, that is actually, something that especially like in like therapy circles is a big thing right now. It's called holding space for someone. If you go, whether it's a family member or a ward member or someone, a friend, someone that you minister to, on the one hand, we can say, well, what can we do for you? And if the person says, I don't know, and sometimes people don't know what they need for comfort. It's this idea of being sad with them. You don't need to solve their problems always. Sometimes you could. Sometimes if, like that example of, excuse me, when we had that storm, the problem was, I need electricity. Everything in my freezer is going to go bad. And it's like, great, I can help you with that. But other times it's like, I don't know what's happening. I have a lot going on, and emotionally I feel flooded. And to be honest, maybe in that moment there is no answer. But for people who, when they're in that situation, to sit with them and be sad with them, feel what they're feeling with them. That is what the Savior would do. The Savior often in his ministry would cry with people. It wasn't about even solving the issue. I mean, he are you okay?
Yeah. The shortest scripture in the Bible, Jesus wept, right?
Yeah. John 11:35 is Jesus wept. And it was, and I remember learning that, he wept for us and because of us, but I would also say with us, because that is showing love. That is what it means to covenant with one another in that way, and that's something, I think it's kind of stereotypical, right? That men want to solve problems, whereas women are like, just listen to me. But really, it is that idea of being sad with someone. I don't need you to solve this, and maybe I'll solve it later, and maybe I won't. But I need you to be with me. And Tyler even said, it's about forgiveness and empathy. Those things really do come into play in this, and they're not. They're not. It's one of these things that is simple and complicated at the same time, and we don't want to overcomplicate things, and we don't want to oversimplify things.
Patrick Mason, in his book Planted, which is one of those books that I would recommend to anyone in any sort of church leadership position, does a great job in the very beginning of the book, really diving in deep on that topic. And he uses the example of Job. When Job was going through all of his maladies and everything that was happening to him, his friends came to him, and Mason makes a very important point to emphasize the fact that they sat with him for 3 days and didn't say a word. They just sat with him. And I think that leads back to the difficulty of the whole thing. Man, that could be uncomfortable. I've had a few experiences where I've been in that position to go and sit and mourn with someone, and it's hard. But I think that it's always stood out to me because it matters so much to the people who are affected, and it's something small that we can do, and it makes such a difference. And I love the fact that that's one of the first things when it talks about this very important covenant that we're making with God, that we're going to commit to do this, not to him, but to our fellow brothers and sisters as well.
Yeah. I like that. You said something and I had a thought, but I I don't remember what it was. Great. I want to recognize real quick. I want to say hello to Day Day Brooks, who says, I'm not LDS, but I'm learning a lot from your show. Thanks for helping me understand the gospel. Thank you for being here.
Welcome.
We're happy you're here. Yeah. And Barbara says, Day Day, glad you found this live show. If you have questions, please ask. I'm sure someone will be here to answer them. Absolutely. That's true.
I'm sorry I'm getting distracted. I actually have a little 1-year-old near my foot, and I've got a bunch of tools behind me. So if you see me dart off the screen, it's trying to help her. Don't chew on a saw. That's not a good idea.
You got to do what you got to do. Barbara says, I'm learning so much today. I'm a solver. And yes, this is a great reminder, and I didn't mean to again, simplify it down by, the men and women breakdown. It's kind of a stereotype. And sometimes, sometimes it's for a reason, but yeah, there is value in I love that. What's the book again? Patrick Mason, Planted?
Yeah. It's called Planted by Patrick Mason.
Wonderful. Yeah. So that's a great reminder. That's what I was going to say, that sometimes we find ourselves in those situations where maybe, if we're comforting someone and we don't have, I've been in situations, especially with like my kids when they've been going through things, and I've just, wanted just so badly to just take it away from them so that you don't have to hurt. Like, of course it's natural to want to fix it, to want to take away the hurt. But I found in a lot of situations, there's also value in listening and being empathetic and sympathetic, empathetic as much as you can. And even saying, I don't know what to say. Okay. There it is. Okay. Okay, I think so. I hope so. And John's checking out. I don't know if what I said was just heard, but I'll just repeat it really quickly. That sometimes when we want to, we want so badly because of the love and the compassion we feel for someone, we wish we could take away their burden. But there is a lot of value in saying, I don't know what to say, which is another way of holding space, which is saying, I'm in this with you. You don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. But we're here together. You're not alone. So Bella says, having compassion plays a major role in trying to live in other people's shoes is something that helps. Absolutely. So thank you for that. I want to keep going here. Oh, hello from Jerome, Idaho. Hello, Alicia. Okay, great. Back to Mosiah chapter 18. We were going over verses 17 through 31. And we were talking about ward families. Back to verse 22. And thus he commanded them to preach, and thus they became the children of God. And he commanded them that they should observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And also every day they should give thanks to the Lord their God. And he also commanded them that the priests whom he had ordained should labor with their own hands for their support. And there was one day in every week that was set apart that they should gather themselves together to teach the people and to worship the Lord their God, and also, as often as it was in their power, to assemble themselves together. And that's important, and that's unique for this time, which we'll talk about in a second. In a way, and the priests were not to depend upon the people for their support, but for their labor they were to receive the grace of God, that they might wax strong in the spirit, having the knowledge of God, that they might teach with power and authority from God. And again, Alma commanded that the people of the church should impart of their substance, every one according to that which he had. If he have more abundantly, he should impart more abundantly. And of him that had but little should be required, and to him that had not should be given. And thus they should impart of their substance of their own free will and good desires toward God, and to those priests that stood in need, yea, and to every needy, naked soul. Can I just go back a minute to when I was describing that situation in a previous ward where we had that storm and everyone's power was out? What we ended up doing, that it happened in the early afternoon. And one thing I remember about that, and again, the power was out for days, but that night we looked at, okay, which yard has the most shade. It happens to be my front yard. And we just kind of pulled tables out, and everyone brought what they could. And this wasn't like a typical potluck because no one could prepare. It was like what you've got. It's like, well, I've got this jug of juice and I've got this half bag of chips.
I've got
bread. Yeah. Or a half loaf of bread. It was like presentation was not a thing. It was like, I've got this and I'm sharing it. And it was really special.
Just really quickly, there's the one.
Hey, Vivi. Hi.
So
we can do an hour of that.
I love the man bun. The man.
Yeah. Listen, I can't grow a man bun, so that's why we got to have her do that. So
there you go.
But Jenny, I love that concept because it's just, look, just bring what you have and we're going to make the best of what we've got. It's not a great situation, but sometimes this is, to me, it really sounds like this is taking lemons and making lemonade. Let's do our best with this whole thing.
Yeah. So I just want to, I'll read 29, 30, and 31 in chapter 18. And this he said unto them, having been commanded of God, and they did walk uprightly before God, imparting one to another, both temporally and spiritually, according to their needs and their wants. And now it came to pass that all this was done in Mormon, yea, by the waters of Mormon, in the forest that was near the waters of Mormon, yea, the place of Mormon, the waters of Mormon, the forest of Mormon, how beautiful are they to the eyes of them who there came to the knowledge of their Redeemer. Yea, and how blessed are they, for they shall sing to his praise forever. And these things were done in the borders of the land, that they might not come to the knowledge of the king. Now, we talked a bit about how to be united as members of Christ's church. And to be honest, that might be something that we need to think about depending on the circumstance where we are, where we live, the things that we're experiencing in our own local congregations. You shared an article with us, Brant, and we can put a link to it in the notes here. But, during this quarantine, and all church meetings have been, in-person church meetings have been canceled. The temples have closed, although they are reopening up. Several are, in phase 1, which is live marriage ceremonies for already endowed adults. And as we get back to, depending on how things go with the pandemic and health and safety and all those concerns, it's been interesting because for me personally, and I know, again, I say this a lot, but I know I'm coming from a place of extreme privilege, but I have very much enjoyed worshiping as a family from home and virtually online as we've chosen to do. I also know that for many people, this is a lonely time, and they really, not only look forward to getting back, but need that connection. And I understand too. There are times though that I have said, when church starts back up again, I think I'd rather just do it at home, which can be, let's be honest, a slippery slope. So this leads to the question, why do we need a church? Already we've learned, because we're learning, that we can worship at home, and I won't say everybody, but that some people can have this, some people as of right now can have the sacrament at home. So why do we need a church? Anyone? I'd love to hear thoughts on that. Let's go to some of these comments though too. Let's see, where should we go? Tyler, it's amazing what a simple phone call or text can do to lighten your load and lift you up. Absolutely.
Yep.
Try it. Maybe, I don't know, make a goal for yourself to send 3 texts or something this week. A hello, a hug, or a handshake is all that's needed sometimes. Acknowledging that I exist on earth is sometimes all we need. A text, a call, or a card in the mail would be all I need at the social distancing time in life. Amazing. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so Eduardo says, a church is people, not a place. Okay.
And I've got thoughts on that.
Yep.
You're not alone. You're not alone, Eduardo.
Yep. Alicia, I do not have that option. My husband and mother-in-law are Pentecostal. Husband is taking missionary. Absolutely. And that's what I mean when I say, I know I'm coming from a place of privilege because of my personal situation. And so I want to acknowledge for people for whom it's a really hard time. I understand. So I don't want to be disrespectful by expressing that. Brenda says, when you don't have a church to go to, it is so lonely. Yeah. I was going to reference that article, but Brent, did you have some thoughts on that?
So I do, and it's been interesting to think through and go through this section of the Book of Mormon while we're all self-quarantining, because I think it brings up a lot of those questions. We mentioned on our weekly show last week, I had thrown a question out on Twitter, and you could follow us at The Mormon News or follow Jenny at formerly Fred on Twitter. But I threw out a question wanting to know, when do you think we're going to go back to church? And the options were less than a month, 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months plus, or it's going to vary depending on the state. And the majority of people think that it's going to be 3 to 6 plus months. So we've been self-quarantining for a few months now, not going to church. And people don't think it's going to be happening anytime in the near future that we're going to be going back. And so it's natural that those questions of, so why do we need the church? Why can't we just do it at home? And I think that's natural. And that's why I think I really, really liked what was going on in Mosiah chapter 18, verse 8, because he kind of lays out all the different requirements for the foundational membership of the church. And the first one that he lays out is they want to be part of a community. Conversion begins with being desirous to come into the fold of God and be called his people. And I think that what we're finding is that we can have our own individual religious experience, but then there's also community element to that as well. And so while the church is a place that we go, I think that one thing that maybe shouldn't be forgotten through this whole thing is we can maintain some of those individual parts of church, doing home church and come follow me and things like that. But that communal element is almost foundational and key. And I think the reason why is there is something that happens when communities go through experiences together. So Jenny, you talk about that supercell that happened and how it brought your community closer, even if it was just for a night. And by being able to take part of these group experiences, whether it's partaking of the sacrament, a very powerful church meeting, general conference to a certain extent, that really does enhance the spirituality of things. And I think that what it allows us also to do is it allows us to be around each other, this whole concept of families. We're all in this together, guys. To quote High School Musical, we're all in this together. And so what this does is it allows us to enhance the experience. And I was in a conversation with someone earlier this week. We were talking about some of the different perspectives from our religion versus others and how we draw boundaries for, okay, if you live in this area, you're going to go to this church. Sometimes those boundaries line up with socioeconomic boundaries. Maybe people in a more wealthy part will all go to the same church. I'm in a unique situation in my area because within part of our church boundaries, we have people who are C-suite Fortune 500 executives, but we also have people who are in some pretty tough situations. I'll put it that way, tough financially situations. And the thing that's always stood out to me and the reason why I've always loved where I've lived is because we have situations where those people are serving together. Those people are being forced to mingle together. And I think that's so incredibly powerful versus just wanting to self-select and, oh, okay, you politically believe the same way I do. We're in the same socioeconomic area here. I think that there's something powerful in a group coming together and having that experience, especially a group with all different diverse backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm glad that we've gotten some quite a bit of response on this because and I'm glad that you brought that up, Brent, because the truth is we can still, going back to church in person doesn't limit what we can do at home and what we can continue to do at home. The resources that we have with General Conference and connecting virtually with the other resources that we have. I really like this. Let's see. Tyler says we need a church to keep on the path and to not waver. I think of all the epistles to the various people in the Bible. were about keeping people on the path, and any issues or wavering was taken care of and clarified. Barbara here has a great point here. She says, our testimony is strengthened when we hear others' struggles or positive experiences, which 1,000,000%. I mean, how many times have you been at a testimony meeting and someone's, or just in a class where you get to hear someone else's perspective, someone else's lived experience, and that gives you some insight into the world at large, into your local community, and into that person for sure. And it helps us become more sympathetic. Carolyn says, we need a church to exercise love and faith and be more like Christ. Real quick, Tyler's previous comment. Yeah, because this is it. It's really easy to become prideful and think that you just need yourself. A church helps us to serve others in a different way, and a more organized, and a way more organized, hopefully more organized. And that's true. And I think that's, at least for myself, I will just own it, that I think that it's just a matter of like pride. And sometimes I feel like, no, but again, I have to also recognize the privilege in that, because as what Bella, I believe, said, not having a church to go to is really lonely. It's very lonely. And
Brenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Brenda said. Who did I say?
Bella.
Oh, I'm sorry. Brenda said it. Okay. Yes. Who else should we go to? Wow. There are a lot of comments here. Barbara again. The love you feel for people, I think, is key also. I've been invited to join my old ward Sunday services through Zoom. And the first week I cried a little after it ended. I was reminded of the good people who served me a lot in my times of need. We need church for that reason, to love others besides our own family members. So I want to go back to what we alluded to before, this article that you sent over, Brant. It's on the website by common consent, and it's by Michael Austin. John's showing it right now. It's Alma at the Waters of Mormon, what it means, or what it meant to belong to the world's first church. And basically, Michael Austin, he gives such fantastic insight about just the historical breakdown of what happens here in these chapters. He says basically that what happens here gets too little. The importance of what happens here gets too little attention. There's too little attention given to it because of the importance of it. And so let's see. Let's go back to. All right. Yeah, there it is. Break it down into 3 fundamental requirements of membership in the church. The first requirement is to want to be part of the community. Conversion begins with being desirous to come into the fold of God and to be called his people. And it seems simple to us because that's what joining the church is. But it's actually a very modern idea. From Constantine through Jefferson, Western Christianity was organized around state churches to which one belonged as a matter of national citizenship. So religious affiliation wasn't freely chosen. It was something essentially that you were born into. So I think you probably say something more cultural. So anyway, there's so much in this article that I don't want to just read it. But the second requirement is to enter into a covenant with the other members of the community. There was something that he said though that basically that this was kind of the first church. Where is that in the article, Brent? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's going to be up near the top. He says there is no ancient precedent for what we call a church. And so before Alma's creation of the church at the Waters of Mormon, this was how it seemed to work among the Nephites. And so he's going through and basically saying they're trying to establish what we're now viewing as a church. And it's really interesting to see some of the areas that they're examining. Now, one of the areas that I want to talk about a little bit more was this requirement to enter a covenant with other members of the community. And I'm not sure we think about this too much when we think about baptism. So Michael says the original baptismal covenant involved exactly 204 people. It's extremely important that the first covenant they made was with each other rather than with a formal organization. To qualify for membership in the ecclesia, or this church, they had to promise to bear one another's burdens, that they may be light, to mourn with those that mourn, and to comfort those that stand in need of comfort. They had to promise, in other words, to become an integral part of the lives of 203 other people. Or if we think about how many people might be coming to our sacrament meeting, let's say an average of 200 people, we're essentially making a covenant to be an integral part of those other 200 people at our sacrament meetings, and to learn to treat them as they would treat members of their own family. And I love that concept, Jenny, because I think for me, that really drives it home so much more, that it's not just we go to church and we take the sacrament and then maybe we have a calling where we interact with people. It needs to be much more involved and engaged. And I know that we're seeing through some of the comments, people are talking about how some of those ministering efforts, or those efforts to still retain part of your community, is happening. And it's just amazing how when we go through an epidemic like this, where a lot of social interaction is cut off, we begin to see just how important and essential that is, not just for our own religious environment and for our own religious community, but for us as people as well. I mean, that interaction is so important.
Absolutely. And I like what he says right after what you talked about treating ward members as they would their own family. The clear implication here is that learning how to love a few hundred other people is the most important thing that happens in the Church of Christ. Mm-hmm. Conversion doesn't mean to change religions or even become someone who thinks that Jesus is really neat. It means to give up the essential selfishness and tribalism of natural humanity and become capable of seeing and treating other people as Christ sees and treats them, which is also what Paul meant by the word that the King James Version translates as charity. So he says, an ecclesia is a school of Christ-like love, a contained religious community where we can learn how to love actual people in the way that Christ requires of his disciples. That's what community is. Mm-hmm. And that's the covenant that is made in conversion in church. And the third requirement is to stand as witnesses of God at all times and in all things and in all places, that ye may be in even until death. He says this is the core of discipleship, not allegiance to an institution or to a set of doctrines, but a willingness to testify constantly of the reality of Christ and the centrality of the atonement. This requirement of baptism comes with a powerful promise that ye may be redeemed of God and be numbered with those of the first resurrection, that ye may have eternal life. It is the mutuality of these promises that make them a covenant. And through baptism, Alma's followers further covenanted to serve him and keep his commandments, that he may pour out his spirit more abundantly upon you, which is the commitment that we now renew each week by taking the sacrament. So to stand as witnesses, and I know that for anyone who recited that as part of the young women theme for years, that's something that's kind of seared in. Do we have some, I know we have so many comments here.
You want to start with?
Well, I know that Tyler asked this question. He said, quick question for you guys. What are your wards doing while in quarantine? Mine hasn't done anything officially, and that's why I was wondering if anyone else has done meetings or any kind of pseudo gathering. That's a good question, Tyler. We talked about that a little bit on last week's episode, I believe, of our podcast, and we'll probably talk about it more. But right now, it just seems to be kind of varying by region, or even vary on a local level. As far as like what local leadership is determining for people to do.
So Tyler, for example, Tyler, in our area, they're doing they're calling it a devotional, where they bring a few speakers on, they speak between 5 and 10 minutes. They do it via Zoom, but they take I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but they're able to broadcast it via a private Facebook or YouTube live link. So we don't have to worry about Zoom bombing or anything like that. But the link gets sent out to the ward, so the ward can watch it if they'd like.
Awesome. Yeah. So, there's lots of discussion on what people are doing. Barbara says, my old California ward is doing Zoom church, which is great. My current Utah ward, our primary music leader, is doing a live or recorded sharing time. That's very generous.
I like that.
Yeah. And where we are in the Salt Lake City area, there haven't been any formal meetings via Zoom or otherwise, but we do have a private like ward area Facebook page where the primary song leader, she does a little program, and I don't even know that she was asked to do it. It's just what she does, and it's very sweet. Elder Christofferson gave a talk in a conference in the fall of 2015. And he said, I realize that there are those who consider themselves religious or spiritual and yet reject participation in a church or even the need for such an institution. Religious practice is for them purely personal. Yet the church is the creation of him in whom our spirituality is centered, Jesus Christ. It is worth pausing to consider why he chooses to use a church. His church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to carry out his and his Father's work. And so then he gives some reasons why a church has been organized. He says, to preach the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ and administer the ordinances of salvation, in other words, to bring people to Christ, to create a community, and here we go, of saints that will sustain one another and the straight and narrow from whom our spirit, which leads to eternal life. Joined in faith, we teach and edify one another and strive to approach the full measure of discipleship. And then also to offer a weekly gathering of respite and renewal, a time and place to leave the world behind, the Sabbath, to achieve needful things that cannot be accomplished by individuals or smaller groups, including dealing with poverty, taking the gospel to all the world, building and operating temples, houses of the Lord, where vital ordinances and covenants may be administered, and also to make available priesthood keys with which the church's priesthood officers preserve the purity of the Savior's doctrine and the integrity of his saving ordinances, help prepare those who wish to receive them, judge the qualification and worthiness of those who apply, and then perform them and identify both truth and falsehood. So here's the thing. Why church? Why not just on our own? First of all, going to church doesn't preclude you from doing things on your own. Secondly, there are things that can be done as a community that enrich the individual and cannot be done without a group. So yes, Tyler.
Can I throw just one more thought out there? And this is something that I've personally been thinking about too. I think the physical act of going to church shouldn't be disregarded either. If you think about what it's like when you go to the temple, you enter the temple. It is somewhat part of the entire experience to present your recommend, go into the locker room, change out of your, I guess we could call them Gentile or street clothes, even if you are wearing church clothes, change into whites, and then go through that whole experience. And so that entire deal of going to the temple and changing like that, I think really is part of the temple. And I wonder if part of church too is supposed to be a little bit of that, whether you live in a place where your church building is very close, and so it's only a 2-minute car ride, or if you're in a situation where your church building is a little bit farther away, the fact that you are waking up, you're putting on clothes you might not normally wear, you're physically going to a building, I think that that's part of that experience too, because it allows you to put your mind in the right frame. And while I think we've been able to replicate that kind of at home, I don't know about you, Jenny, but it's almost not the same. It's similar, but it's not the same.
Absolutely. You're right. There is something about that effort. And to be honest with you, this is something that I struggled with a lot as a teenager. I just thought, it seemed kind of annoying, I guess, for 3 hours a week to go to church, but and now it's 2 hours. But I do remember a missionary at that time who has become a friend, who said it's 3 hours a week. That's all. It's just, that thought of, like earlier when Tyler was saying, you don't want to be prideful thinking you can do it all on your own. It really is very little of an effort in that way. Now, at that time, I think I lived like a 15-minute drive from the chapel, and I was maybe one of the people who lived the closest to it because it was, back east. But and for a lot of people going to the temple is or going to church is a huge time commitment. But those efforts are valuable, and going through the actions and participating in those things, like you said, are valuable. Like Tyler says, it's a lot more easy to be lazy when you don't have to go somewhere. That comes from personal experience. Maybe we're all, living that right now. It is. I want to. That hour has gone really quickly. John Dye.
Is John here? John's actually part of this whole thing.
John's behind the scenes running all the things.
Hey, so yeah, there's a bunch that has been talked about and a bunch that hasn't been. The latter part of the scriptures. One thing that I'll show really quick, I find this helpful, and I'll put a link to this. So anyone that is geeky like me and likes to look, the numbers are the chapters in Mosiah. Again, this is the third part of where we get in this time machine and we go back and forth between, we have Zeniff, obviously, we have King Noah, we have King Limhi, and we jump back and forth through some of these chapters in Mosiah. So this really helps me understand where all of that comes together and how helpful that is to understand all of these things that are happening simultaneously. One thing I will mention really quick, I think that is very helpful to me, is Mosiah. One of the latter scriptures that we talk about here in this 18 through 24, you'll notice that the last two deal with Alma the elder. Now, Amulon, one of the king's priests, King Noah's priests, finds him, makes their life miserable. If you look, actually, let me try to pull that up because that might be helpful if we talk about this. But the time span that he could have had living this miserable life with these souls that he brought into the church, up to 25 years. It talks about that in the chapter title, and we talk about long suffering and enduring to the end. Imagine how hard it would have been to deal with Amulon and his, I would say, less than righteous people, putting burdens on their back. And what it talks about in that chapter is our Heavenly Father not delivering them out of the burdens that they had, but strengthening their backs and giving them the power to hold up, and stand up and do the things that they needed to do while there were issues that they were having to deal with. So again, if you look at the time span that it gives in the chapter heading, that could have been up to 25 years, you guys. That is not a small amount of time. So that's one thing I think that's really important. The other thing is if we look at Limhi's people, the way that they were delivered versus the way Alma's people were delivered. Limhi's people, they actually gave the guards alcohol, right? Made them drunk, and they snuck out of the city and went back to Zarahemla, and they were delivered. Versus Alma's people were asked to, hey, hang on to this for a certain number of time, again, up to 25 years, and eventually they were delivered as well. So it can happen very quick like it did for Limhi's people, or we can be asked to endure. And I think those two things are important to think about, that there is not just a formulaic way that the Lord deals with us. He knows what we need, and he'll give us what we need as long as we turn to him. So I'll just give you that.
Thank you. And
I just read one comment that we got because I think it's an important one. Yeah. This is from Bella. She said,
yep.
Different in every area in Guyana. We have lots of single parents, less priesthood in homes, no internet in many homes. Church will be number one for us in Guyana. And I think that that's another important perspective, that there are parts of the world where, whether it be in rural parts of the United States, Canada, Mexico, other countries across the world, where they really are cut off, and this is difficult. So I'm really thankful that Bella gave that perspective.
Yes, thank you, because that, having technology is a privilege in a lot of areas of the world, and thank you, John, for sharing that. That people are asking for the link to that chart, because that was very helpful. And you're right. I mean, the Lord operates in the ways that that we all individually need. Before we close, I know we're at the time, but I said we were going to talk about this. And so, given all that we have discussed, what are a lot of people, whether church is easily accessible, meaning church community, being able to attend church, or whether it takes more effort, there are people who do not feel comfortable at church. What can we do to help people feel more comfortable attending church and being a member of the community to which we have covenanted to comfort one another.
Yeah, that one's so hard. And I think it's so hard because we never know who's out there. I've always liked the idea, and I'm not sure if it's still being done, but once a year there were some groups out there who were making specific days that individuals from marginalized communities, mostly the LGBT communities, would have a spot. It was called like a Come Sit With Me Sunday, where they would reserve a spot for anyone that wanted to come sit with them. And it seems like it's such a simple thing, but the act of, and there's so much cultural stuff here, the act of allowing someone to sit next to you at church and to actively make room for them, not passively when you see that they're waiting, but to actively make room for them is a really powerful thing. And I think that maybe that's just a small little thing that we can do, is to actively and doing it with a purpose, looking for people and inviting them to come sit with you, no matter who they are. That can send a very powerful message, because we don't know what it took for that person to come to church today. There could be a lot of factors. Yes,
I agree. And I know there have been times when I've been in a class where someone has either said, hey, come sit by me, or I have gone in feeling like I'm here because I said I would be here, but I feel lonely. And so I've just sat by myself, and I've had someone come up to me and say, hey, can I sit by you? And sometimes we chat and sometimes we don't. And, we've said this a lot, especially lately during this pandemic and the quarantine, but one of the most painful parts of these things is feeling isolated. And so it's difficult to feel isolated when it's difficult enough to feel that we're isolated when we're actually isolated, but to feel isolated when you're around a lot of people. Maybe keep an eye out, look on the fringes, see if there's someone who is alone. Look for, it seems, again, I don't mean to simplify this, but don't do it because it's an assignment. Do it because, take a sincere interest in someone.
Yeah. I've always liked the phrase, be actively engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great.
And we showed a couple of these.
So, okay. Tyler says, go ahead. I think if we reach out in different ways, not necessarily only at church, that can help them feel more comfortable. A lot of it is also how we make them feel comfortable in our own lives. If they're not comfortable around the people that are at church, why would they be comfortable at church? Yeah, for sure. And for some people, that means your neighbors. And for some people, that means people who live across town or in a different town.
Yep.
But, there are ways, if you're talking, to people on Facebook or elsewhere across the world, you can, include that too.
Yeah. One key thing I think too, I'll just add really quickly is, the Lord meets us where we're at, right? He knows where we're at, what we need. And I think for us to assume that certain people need to do certain things to deserve love or fellowship is wrong, right? We need to love them just because they exist, just because they're our brothers and sisters. And we sing from when we're small, I am a child of God, right? We have inherent worth. And to take that away from somebody, or to say that they need to be at a certain level before we provide that, is just wrong. And so again, I do like what Tyler says here. For the one, or excuse me, I looked at the wrong one. If they are not comfortable around the people that are at church, why would they be comfortable at church? So accept people for who they are, just for being who they are. And that's where it all starts.
So Jenny, if I could, I just in wrapping up, number one, a very big thank you to Jenny. Jenny's the one that is our facilitator, not necessarily a teacher, because she doesn't like to be a teacher. She's our facilitator for our wonderful discussion. John's the one doing double duty behind the scenes, getting all the nice transitions and everything like that. Jenny and John, if we want to follow you, see some more of your travels, or get more of your insights, where could we find you?
Where can we find you?
I'm at Diejo on Twitter, Dyejo. Awesome. Where are you, Jenny?
I am on Twitter and on Instagram. My handle is @formerlyfred, which is FORMERLYPHREAD, as in Fred. I also have a blog, formerlyfred.com. That blog has a Facebook page, Formerly Fred, and you can give that a like. Also, sorry, we are backwards here. I have a Facebook page called Zumba with Jenny Dye. You can just search Jenny Dye Zumba, and that's dye, D-Y-E, like you dye your hair. If you're interested, there have been plenty of people who have joined my online Zumba class from listening to this, participating here and listening to the podcast. So what about you, Brent?
You could find me on Twitter at The Mormon News, where I post about my quarantine lifestyle and usually post out of context quotes from my wife and kids. You could email the show if you want to send us any of your thoughts, mail@mormonnewsreport.com, or send us one of the nice Facebook messages that we've been getting. And this is just what we do. Every Sunday we do this to cover Come Follow Me, our Sunday school, our virtual church for the week. If you're interested in hearing what the actual show is like, where we discuss Mormon news, you can find us anywhere you download podcasts. Just search for Mormon News Report. Jenny and I every week go through the top stories in Mormon news and usually give our commentary. And we always end with Sunshine in Our Soul, which is probably the best part of my week because I like to hear what's going on with you, Jenny and John. So that being said, Jenny, thank you for joining. Thank you for hosting. And I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Well, thank you very much, Brent, for being with us. Thank you for sharing your baby with us a little bit. She's so cute. Thank you, John, for everything you do. John, last night with the connection, we didn't know if we were going to have a problem, and he just set it all up to do a run through to see if it would work. And by golly, he figured it out. We are not in a situation that we thought we would be in for this today, and he just makes it run smoothly. And he's the one who does the research to find the charts and the pictures. And so thank you, John Dye. And anyway, thanks again, everyone. I can't tell you, it means a lot to us that you spend this time with us, that you participate by letting us know where you're watching from. Thank you for your encouragement, for your support, for being vulnerable and sharing your situations, your experiences. We really appreciate you. So hope you have a great week. And again, next week is Mosiah chapters 25 through 28. They were called the people of God, and that will be Sunday, May 24th, right back here at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, 12 noon Eastern, and all times in between. So thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Brant. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
have a great
everybody.
day. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.